It was a quiet Monday afternoon on campus. The sky was gray, and a soft drizzle tapped on the windows of the math building. Most students were either in class or rushing to avoid the rain. But outside, under the building's stone archway, stood Professor Langston. Professor Langston was not just any teacher. He was famous for his knowledge in advanced mathematics and just as well known for his sharp attitude. Many students feared his lectures, not because the math was too hard, but because he had a habit of making people feel small. He believed only a few had the brain for real math, and he made sure everyone knew it. As he sipped from his steaming cup of coffee, he spotted someone unusual across the courtyard. A woman stood by the large chalkboard next to the steps. The board was often used by students and professors to write problems or share ideas. Today, it displayed a long and difficult calculus problem, full of symbols and strange numbers. The woman didn't look like a student or a professor. She wore a simple dress with a plain sweater, and her hair was tied back. She looked like someone who worked in one of the nearby shops. Her hands were slightly red, maybe from washing dishes or cleaning. Yet she stood still, staring at the chalkboard with deep focus. Professor Langston raised an eyebrow. Who was this woman? Why was she staring at a problem even some of his graduate students couldn't touch? He walked over slowly, standing beside her, but not saying a word at first. He looked at her sideways, trying to guess what she might be thinking. Finally, with a half-smile, he said, "Those aren't food prices you're reading. Calculus isn't for everyone." The woman turned her head slightly and looked at him. Her face was calm, and her eyes were steady. "I know," she replied, "but I enjoy looking at patterns. This one caught my eye." Professor Langston gave a small chuckle. "Well, since you enjoy patterns, would you like to try solving it? I'd be impressed if you even got started." The woman looked at the board again, then back at him. "May I use the chalk?" she asked politely. He stepped back, offering a dramatic bow. "Be my guest." A few students walking by stopped to watch. The rain had slowed, and the air was quiet except for the soft scratching sound as she picked up the chalk and began to write. Nobody expected what happened next. Clara stepped forward slowly, holding the piece of chalk gently in her hand. Her fingers had a slight shake, not from fear, but from the cold rain that had soaked her sleeves just minutes earlier. She looked at the board again, her eyes moving over the long line of numbers and symbols. A few more students had stopped under the archway now, curious about what was happening. They whispered to each other, wondering who she was and why Professor Langston was standing silently beside her. Some of them had seen this same problem during a lecture. None of them had solved it. Most had given up. Professor Langston crossed his arms and watched with a smug expression. He was sure she wouldn't get far. He had seen students with top grades fail to make sense of the question. To him, Clara looked like someone out of place, just someone passing by. But Clara didn't rush. She stared at the problem for a full minute before even making a mark. Her face showed no stress. Instead, she seemed calm and focused, as if solving puzzles like this was something she did for fun. Then, slowly, she began to write. First came a few small notes at the side of the board, simple steps that showed she understood the rules of calculus. Then she moved on to the main equation. The chalk moved steadily, without pause. She erased one part, rewrote it cleaner, then continued. Step by step, the problem started to shrink. Each line she wrote brought the messy equation closer to something clear. The crowd grew. Now even a few teaching assistants had stepped outside, holding notebooks and coffee. Everyone was quiet, watching her hand move across the board. Professor Langston's smile had faded. He leaned in closer, reading what she had written. He squinted, checking each step. Every part was correct. He looked at her again, this time with more interest. She had not asked a single question. She had not stopped to think. Her pace was steady, but her focus was deep. Finally, she reached the end of the problem. She placed the chalk down on the small tray below the board and stepped back. "I believe that's the answer," she said quietly, brushing her hands together. There was silence. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Then someone near the back muttered, "No way." A teaching assistant walked up quickly, double-checking the steps. He turned to Professor Langston and gave a slight nod. "It's right," he said in a low voice. "Every part." The professor didn't speak. He just stared at the board, then back at Clara. She gave a small smile, almost shy, and began to walk away. But the whispers behind her were growing louder. Who was she? How did she solve it? And why had no one ever seen her before? The rain had stopped, but the excitement in the air was only growing. Clara walked down the steps of the math building quietly, her eyes on the ground. She didn't notice how many people were now watching her. She didn't seem to care. Professor Langston remained frozen in front of the chalkboard. The solution was still there, clear and correct. He had taught this very problem in his most advanced class just 2 weeks ago. No one had solved it. And yet, a woman he had never seen in a lecture hall had done it in minutes. Who is she? A student whispered nearby. No idea, someone answered. Maybe she's visiting from another school. Professor Langston cleared his throat, pushing his thoughts aside. He stepped down the stairs quickly, catching up to Clara just before she reached the sidewalk. "Excuse me," he said. "How did you know how to solve that? Have you studied calculus before?" Clara stopped and turned. She didn't look surprised. "A little," she said. "I used to read books from the library. I like problems that don't have easy answers." "That wasn't a beginner problem," the professor replied. "Are you a student here?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I work at the campus cafe. But sometimes I look at the boards when I have time." Now a small group had followed them. Some students held their phones, pretending not to record. Others just listened, stunned. "So you've never taken a class?" Professor Langston asked. "No, sir," she said, "but I do study on my own." There was a long pause. The professor looked at her carefully, then nodded. "Very well. Would you like to try another?" Clara tilted her head. "Another problem." He pointed back toward the board. "I have one that even my top students can't figure out. Maybe you'll find it fun." The crowd around them murmured with surprise. It wasn't like Professor Langston to challenge people twice. He usually embarrassed them once, then walked away. But today was different. Clara looked at the group, then back at the professor. She thought for a moment. "All right," she said. "I'll try one more." They walked back up the steps. A fresh piece of chalk was placed in her hand. Professor Langston quickly wrote a new equation on the board. It was longer than the first, filled with symbols from calculus and even some from higher-level math. He stepped aside and crossed his arms again. Clara looked at the problem. She didn't speak. She only nodded once, then began writing. Once again, the crowd fell silent. Within seconds, it became clear this wasn't luck. Clara stood in front of the board again, the new problem staring back at her like a mountain to climb. But she didn't flinch. She held the chalk with confidence and calmness, as if she had done this 100 times before. This problem was harder than the first one. It had strange symbols and multiple steps, the kind of math that confused even strong students. Still, Clara moved carefully, reading each part before writing anything. She tapped the chalk lightly against the board, thinking. Then she started with a single line. Her first step was clean and clear. A few students nodded. They could tell she knew what she was doing. She moved to the second line quickly, then to the third. She erased a small part, corrected it, and continued. Professor Langston stood nearby, watching her every move. He didn't speak. His face didn't show much, but inside, he was trying to understand how this woman, who had never sat in his classroom, was solving one of the most difficult problems he had ever given. The students around them leaned in. One whispered, "She's using substitution, but not in the usual way." Another added, "She's skipping steps we thought were needed, but somehow it still works." In just a few minutes, Clara had filled half the board. Her handwriting was neat, and her math was sharp. She didn't talk or explain her steps. She just let the numbers speak for her. Someone from the back said quietly, "She's better than most of the grad students." The professor heard it, but didn't reply. He already knew it was true. By the 10th minute, Clara stood back and looked at the final line. She double-checked her work, then placed the chalk down gently. "This is my answer," she said softly. Again, silence. No one clapped. No one moved. They were too stunned. A student stepped forward and began reviewing the steps. He nodded slowly. Then another checked it and gave a small smile. "It's perfect," he said. Professor Langston looked at the board, reading it from top to bottom. He traced her steps with his eyes, following her logic. It all made sense. More than that, it was elegant, clean, better than what he had seen in years. He turned to Clara. "What is your name?" "Clara Nguyen," she replied. He nodded slowly, the name repeating in his mind. As Clara stepped away from the board, someone in the crowd whispered, "Wait, I've heard that name before." Clara didn't stay to explain. She gave a polite nod and began walking toward the sidewalk again. But the questions behind her were louder now. Who is she, really? How does someone learn this on their own? Why haven't we seen her before? In that moment, even Professor Langston was left without answers. Word of Clara's brilliance spread quickly. Within hours, the story of the woman who had solved Professor Langston's impossible calculus problem had reached nearly everyone on campus. Some students were still in shock, while others tried to make sense of what they had witnessed. The next morning, Clara returned to her usual job at the campus cafe. She wore the same simple clothes. Nothing special, nothing flashy. But today, the students who came in for their morning coffee looked at her differently. Some whispered to each other as she made their drinks, while others just stared, trying to connect the quiet woman behind the counter with the genius who had solved one of the hardest math problems on campus. Clara, however, didn't seem to notice the attention. She moved through her routine, pouring milk, grinding coffee beans, and handing over change with a warm smile. It was clear that this was her comfort zone, far from the curious eyes of those who now expected her to be someone special. But Clara wasn't looking for recognition. She was just focused on doing her job and getting through the day. That afternoon, Professor Langston paid a visit to the cafe. He had been thinking about Clara all morning, wondering who she was and how she had solved the problem so easily. He ordered a coffee, but instead of walking away, he sat down at the counter and waited. Clara noticed him, but didn't say anything at first. She simply handed him his drink, and as he sipped, she started working on the register. After a moment, he spoke. "Clara," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Can we talk?" She looked up at him and nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sure, Professor. What's on your mind?" He hesitated before continuing. "You're not just someone who likes math, are you? You really understand it." Clara smiled faintly. "I've always liked solving puzzles. Math just happens to be the most interesting one." Professor Langston thought about this. It wasn't what he expected to hear. He had assumed she was just a hobbyist, someone with a passing interest. But the way she spoke made it clear that there was more to her than met the eye. "Why didn't you ever take a class?" he asked. Clara paused for a moment, looking at the ground. "Life got in the way," she said quietly. "I had to care for my mother, and when she passed, I didn't have the time or the money to study. So I kept learning on my own." Professor Langston's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected such an honest answer. He had assumed she was just a casual observer of math, not someone who had built her knowledge from scratch. "You never told anyone this?" he asked. "No," she said. "I didn't think it mattered. I just wanted to understand things on my own." Professor Langston thought for a long moment. Finally, he spoke again, more seriously now. "Clara, I'd like to offer you a chance to study here, formally. We have a program that could help you explore your abilities further. I believe you have the potential to do something amazing." Clara looked at him, her expression softening. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she nodded. "Thank you, Professor. I'll think about it." With that, Professor Langston stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. He had underestimated Clara before, but now he realized that she was someone who could change the future of mathematics, if she chose to. As he left the cafe, he knew one thing for sure. Clara Nguyen was no ordinary woman, and he would never forget her name. The days passed, but Clara's quiet life at the cafe had changed. Students who once came in for coffee now asked her questions about math, about calculus, about the way she had solved problems. Some were polite, others a little too curious, but Clara didn't mind. She simply smiled and moved on with her work, never letting the attention get to her. But one afternoon, when the cafe was quieter than usual, Professor Langston came back. This time, he wasn't alone. A young man in his mid-30s, wearing glasses and a serious expression, stood beside him. Clara recognized him as one of the senior professors from the math department. She wiped her hands on her apron and greeted them. "Clara, this is Dr. Rogers," Professor Langston said. "He's head of the graduate math program. I've told him about you." Clara nodded politely. "Nice to meet you," she said, offering a warm smile. Dr. Rogers looked at her thoughtfully, as though trying to read her. He was used to meeting people with impressive academic backgrounds, but Clara didn't fit the usual mold. She wasn't from a prestigious school, and she didn't have a fancy degree, and yet there was something about her that seemed different, something special. "Clara," Dr. Rogers said, "we've heard a lot about your abilities. Professor Langston told me you have a unique talent for solving complex problems." Clara felt a small amount of discomfort at the attention. "I just like to figure things out," she said, shrugging slightly. "I don't know if I have any special talent. I just try." The two professors exchanged a glance. Dr. Rogers cleared his throat. "You don't give yourself enough credit. We'd like to offer you a chance to study with us. We could provide you with resources, tutoring, and even some financial support to help you pursue your studies. I believe you could go far if you really wanted to." Clara looked at both of them, her expression serious. She had heard their offer before, in many forms, from other people. They were all eager to see someone with her abilities follow the traditional path, take classes, get a degree, climb the academic ladder. But Clara had never been interested in that. She had chosen her own path, and it had been shaped by her experiences, not by anyone's expectations. "Thank you," she said after a pause. "But I'm not sure. I've always done things on my own. I've never needed a school or a program to learn." Professor Langston's face softened. "I understand. But sometimes having the right tools and support can help you go even further. You don't have to follow anyone's plan, Clara. We just want to help you reach your full potential." Clara thought about this for a moment. She had always enjoyed solving problems, and she had always done it her way. But could she be missing something by avoiding the traditional route? "I'll think about it," she finally said, giving a small nod. The two professors left, but Clara stayed behind, her mind racing. For the first time in a long time, she wondered if there was more she could achieve. Could she combine her love for math with the resources they offered? Or would she stay on the path she had always known, solving problems on her own? The questions lingered in her mind as she cleaned the counter and prepared for the next wave of customers. One thing was clear: her future was not as certain as it had once seemed. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was ready for a new chapter. Clara spent the next few days thinking carefully about Professor Langston and Dr. Rogers' offer. Each time she worked at the cafe, her mind wandered back to their words. Part of her was tempted to join the program, to finally step into a world of formal learning and support, but another part of her wasn't sure if that was the right choice. She had always worked alone, finding solutions on her own, and she wondered if being part of a school program would change that. On one of the quiet afternoons, while she was cleaning the counter, a young man entered the cafe. He was dressed in a hoodie and jeans, with a backpack slung over one shoulder. Clara didn't recognize him, but there was something familiar about his nervous energy. He walked up to the counter and looked around before meeting her gaze. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Clara?" Clara smiled gently. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The young man hesitated, then spoke again. "I saw you solve that calculus problem a few days ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what about it?" "Well, you're amazing," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I've been struggling with calculus for months, and watching you solve that problem was incredible. I've never seen anyone do that before." Clara chuckled softly. "Thank you. But I'm just someone who enjoys solving things. It's really no big deal." The young man seemed to take her words seriously, but he wasn't ready to leave yet. "It's a big deal to me," he said, his eyes lighting up. "And I was wondering, would you be willing to help me? I'm really stuck, and I think you could teach me." Clara paused. She wasn't sure if she wanted to take on a student. After all, she was still unsure about her own future in math. But the way the young man looked at her, so hopeful and eager to learn, made her pause. Maybe it was time to share what she had learned, to help someone else the way she had helped herself. "All right," she said after a moment. "I'll help you. Meet me here after your classes tomorrow, and we can start." The young man's face brightened. "Really? Thank you so much." As he left the cafe, Clara felt a strange feeling in her chest. For the first time, she realized that her knowledge, the one she had kept to herself for so long, could be useful to someone else. Maybe helping others wasn't such a bad idea after all. The next day, Clara waited at the cafe, a notebook open in front of her. When the young man arrived, she smiled and began to explain the calculus concepts he had been struggling with. As they worked together, she found herself teaching with patience and clarity, guiding him through each step until he began to understand the material more easily. As the lesson came to an end, the young man thanked her profusely. "I don't know what to say," he said. "You're amazing." Clara smiled. "I'm just showing you the way. You'll get there on your own." After he left, Clara sat back, thinking. Helping someone else had been different from solving problems alone. It had been rewarding in a way she hadn't expected. And for the first time, she wondered if perhaps she was ready to move beyond the cafe, beyond the quiet life she had always known. Maybe it was time to embrace something new. A week passed, and Clara found herself thinking about her decision more and more. Helping the young man had felt good. It had felt like she was doing something meaningful, something that went beyond just solving problems for herself. She realized that maybe, just maybe, teaching others could be the next step in her life. As the days went by, more students began to seek her out. They would stop by the cafe after their classes, asking for help with calculus, algebra, or even more advanced math. Word had spread quickly, and soon Clara was tutoring several students a week. Her days were busier now, but she didn't mind. Each lesson gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. One morning, Professor Langston stopped by the cafe again. This time, he wasn't alone. Dr. Rogers was with him, and there was a third person with them, a woman Clara didn't recognize. The woman was in her mid-40s, wearing glasses and holding a folder. Clara looked up from the counter and greeted them. "Clara," Professor Langston said warmly, "this is Dr. Marie Thornton. She's a professor in the math department, and she's heard about the work you've been doing here." Clara smiled politely. "Nice to meet you, Dr. Thornton." Dr. Thornton extended her hand. "Nice to meet you too, Clara. I've heard incredible things about your abilities. Professor Langston and Dr. Rogers tell me you've been helping students with some very advanced math." Clara felt a bit shy, but she nodded. "I've been helping a few students. I enjoy it, actually." "That's wonderful to hear," Dr. Thornton said. "We've been thinking about your future, Clara. Professor Langston and Dr. Rogers believe you have a real gift. We would like to extend an offer to you, a formal position as a teaching assistant here at the university. It's an opportunity to work with students, teach, and contribute to research. We think you could make a big impact." Clara's heart raced. This wasn't the offer she had expected, but it was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. She had never thought of becoming a teacher, let alone a teaching assistant at a university, but now it felt like a new chapter was opening in her life. I don't know what to say," Clara stammered. Dr. Thornton smiled gently. "You don't have to decide right away, Clara. Take your time. We just want you to know that the offer is on the table. You don't have to follow the traditional path if you don't want to. We believe in your abilities, and we want to help you reach your full potential." Clara felt a mix of excitement and fear. Could she really step into this world? Could she leave the cafe and start something new? Part of her wanted to say no, to keep her life simple and safe. But another part of her, the part that loved solving problems and helping others, felt ready for the challenge. After a long pause, Clara finally spoke. "Thank you for believing in me. I'll think about it carefully. But I think this might be the right time to try something new." Professor Langston and Dr. Rogers smiled at each other. They had known all along that Clara was special. Now, they were glad to see that she was starting to believe it too. As Clara cleaned the counter later that day, she couldn't stop thinking about the offer. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined.